Imagine carrying a towering stack of metal boxes and wooden crates. Your knees are buckling, your arms are shaking, you're drowning under the weight. Then someone walks up, sees you trembling, and offers to take half the load. And you immediately smile, tighten your grip, and say, "I got it, I'm fine." Society usually rewards this behavior. We see a reflexive rejection of help and assume the person is highly competent, displaying a fierce, admirable independence. Psychology observes this behavior through an entirely different lens. To a psychologist, chronic refusal of support operates as a hardwired, deeply ingrained survival habit. Pushing people away while collapsing serves as a complex defense mechanism. The behavior masks terrifying vulnerability behind the illusion of heroic strength. This diagram shows two abstract figures, the left holding a massive dark block representing internal stress. To the chronic overachiever, asking for help feels identical to violently shoving half their heavy burden onto someone else's shoulders, forcing a friend to sag under the weight. To avoid that crushing guilt, the brain deploys a coping mechanism called minimization. It actively convinces the struggling individual that their problems are objectively small. They run a constant internal monologue of comparison. They tell themselves, "It's not that serious," or "Other people have real trauma." They invalidate their own exhaustion, assuming everyone else's stress is worse. Guilt completely warps their logic, convincing the brain that suffering in absolute silence is a mathematically smaller crime than inconveniencing a peer. Beyond guilt, there is the terror of losing control. Reaching out requires admitting that something is too difficult to handle, and for someone used to holding it all together, that feels like emotional freefall. The thick boundary protects the vulnerable glowing core inside. Asking for help forces a gap, exposing the center. But many have opened that gap before, only to be dismissed. That rejection punishes their vulnerability, and the boundary instantly snaps shut, twice as thick. The brain logs those historical dismissals as hard data. It calculates that reaching out is highly likely to result in pain and rejection, and highly unlikely to yield comfort. The strong friend persona functions as carefully calculated defensive armor, built brick by brick to prevent the pain of repeated rejection. We can trace the blueprint for this armor back to early childhood development, specifically to environments where parental or emotional support was highly inconsistent. In this flowchart, a child inserts a request for help. It travels down the path and drops into a void. Nothing comes back. Repeated transactional failures cause a neurological adaptation. The brain severs the input path, creating a closed loop, relying exclusively on themselves. Psychologists define this closed-loop behavior as maladaptive self-reliance. This intense, isolating independence forms purely out of strict necessity. When you see an adult profoundly isolated under a mountain of stress, you're watching a child's highly logical survival strategy executing on outdated environmental code. Which brings us to a quiet paradox. The individual fiercely rejecting assistance, swearing they have everything under control, actually desperately wants to be supported. There is a massive psychological gap between the agonizing vulnerability of actively asking for help and the overwhelming relief of simply being noticed. They harbor a secret wish. They hope someone cares enough to look past the thick armor, see through the "I'm fine" facade, and step in to help without needing to be prompted. If you have a stubbornly independent peer who frustrates you by never accepting a hand, try shifting your perspective. Diagnose the silent struggle happening behind their walls instead of feeling annoyed by their distance. Breaking this cycle of chronic self-reliance takes two distinct actions. The individual has to recognize that their silence is an outdated habit, and the community around them must be empathetic enough to reach out when that silence is at its loudest.